Madeline Holt spoke to Sellars about his vision of Mozart, a revolutionary for modern times.
2006 is Mozart's year. At the Barbican, across Britain, in Europe and beyond, they're celebrating his 250th birthday. And this man is an extraordinary interpreter of Mozart's work, director Peter Sellars. He's opera's Mr. Maverick, whose work excites as much as it infuriates. His contemporary take on Mozart's operas has always been controversial. When Sellars set the magic flute among drug addicts under an LA freeway, for example, opera's genteel Glyndebourne Festival audience booed him. But Mozart is more relevant today than in his own time for Sellars. He's not just a drive time soundtrack, he's the world's preeminent writer on forgiveness and reconciliation.
The hardest thing about Mozart is the Mozart industry. We're dealing with a strange phenomenon, I think, in the second half of the 20th century particularly. After Auschwitz, Europe had to somehow say, no, we're not barbarians, we are cultured. And in the 50s, this classical music culture of lovely people enjoying themselves and being cultured. And Mozart was the first hostage of this movement of lovely people who are deeply civilized, not the people who brought you Auschwitz. Mozart actually wrote about Auschwitz too.
I think a lot of people listening will think, well, how did Mozart write about Auschwitz?
Mozart writes a lot about human anguish, about torment, about why people are cruel to each other, about the world being that unfair. And that music being hijacked to be nice music for hotel lobbies and fancy restaurants was a disaster. Every Mozart opera ends with an act of forgiveness. Each one of the major operas, the denouement is a woman arriving and creating the place where reconciliation is possible.
Sellars' new production this summer will be Mozart's unfinished opera, Zaid.
What are you hoping people will say in the office the next morning after coming and seeing your interpretation of Zaid?
Zaid is about slaves, and it's about the fact that slavery is not acceptable, not even for 1 second. Zaid is a really interesting piece because, again, Mozart was 23 years old. So he's at that moment when you're 23 and you do want to change the world and you do think it's possible, and you're not going to joke. You're going to say, this is wrong. Stop it, everybody. Stop it now. There's more slavery right now in the world than in the lifetime of Abraham Lincoln. The new slavery has a different form, and we're now living in this globalized period where, these sweatshops exist. So I will stage Mozart Zaid in one of these sweatshops.
For Sellars, setting Mozart in today's world makes the composer more luminous than ever. But I wonder whether his interpretations get in the way of the music.
Well, forgive me, but I'm sorry. If art isn't about your interpretation, what is it about? Get over it. All of these things are invitations, not to have the right answer on the school exam, but to actually ask yourself what's going on and ask yourself what you see, what you hear, and what you feel.
And Sellars finds answers in the operas.
Idomeneo is specifically about an occupying army in a defeated country that assume, again, they're introducing and creating freedom, when in fact they're creating massive new repression and fear and violence. When I do Mozart's Idomeneo, I'm not telling anybody what to think about the Iraq War. Nonetheless, I'm giving people a prism within which to reflect upon the Iraq War. To me, that's what the arts are about.
You can't help wondering what Mozart would have made of the way Sellars hauls his work around.
Mozart really doesn't want it to be charming, empty, and vacuous. And so when I staged Don Giovanni with these images of incredible violence, of incredible sexual tension, suddenly Mozart's music found the right resonance. I think, again, Mozart's really pleased when you scrape away all of the detritus of a fake 18th century, because the 18th century couldn't deal with Mozart.
It's an arresting take, but you sometimes get the feeling Sellars reckons that his is the only way to read Mozart.
If you didn't know how to listen to it, you just don't hear the content. And the minute someone starts to open up these questions, and away you become sensitized, and you suddenly say, oh my God, listen to that phrase. Oh, that is not just a lovely phrase. This is music of liberation.
But you say you don't really appreciate the music until you understand the context of it and the philosophy behind it. But if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, I really enjoy Mozart without knowing about all that, it could be seen to be quite patronizing.
No, I'm just inviting people to step inside. You know, it looks great from the outside. Now, guess what? You're invited in.
Mozart can touch us all, says Sellars. 250 years after his birth, his music is more powerful than ever.
He's also creating these amazing musical structures that can shift meaning, texture, and temperature in an instant. The speed of thought. That you're really not having a good time, but that suddenly something amuses you or amazes you. Mozart creates a musical structure that contains all of that. And well, it's pretty satisfying.